So, hi everybody, welcome to the Startups Becoming a Unicorn session on our VGI. Super exciting because every time we have a panel here, we get some insane perspective to the same topic, and it's just wonderful to see. So, I want to welcome you guys. I'm going to give quick introductions to our audience about all of you. So, Dr. Heather is from Deakin Faculty of Business and Law. So she's a senior lecturer at Deakin Business School where she teaches innovation, creativity, management, as well as running an entrepreneurship program. So obviously very apt to this topic. Whereas Ankit is a co-founder of Biometer Technologies, again, multifaceted, efficient and enterprising professional with more than 3 years of experience in information technology sphere, which we obviously know is something that is really important at this day and age and with a wide array of services in data management, data analysis, business intelligence. So you'll have to excuse me there because my subject area, I have no idea about this. I'm probably like the last person who would know anything about that. But entrepreneurship, yes. So, and then last but not the least, we have Ishan Chaturvedi, who's the founder and director at Enviful, who we also had the chance of meeting yesterday in a sustainability panel. It was so wonderful. So Ishan is an environment and energy lawyer, but he's also an active member in the World Commission of on Environmental Law and advocate in Supreme Court. I can actually go on and on, but Envipol is what we're going to be focused on today, which obviously is focused on sustainability as well. So a lot of environment and entrepreneurship going on there, and you've got a fellowship as well. So if anybody has any specific questions, want to know more about them, obviously they're all on LinkedIn. Please Google and to find out. But you can also ask questions on the chat, and we'll be happy to address those. So I'm going to get quickly started on our actual panel discussion. And I'm just going to start with the opening question and please feel free to pick up the questions as you feel like. I won't be directing them to anybody specific. Wherever you think you want to pick it up, please feel free to do so. So we know that obviously with COVID-19 crisis, we've seen a lot of changes in the entrepreneurial space, as well as just like overall mentality in people and how they want to approach this whole startup culture and things like that. So we're going to be focusing a little bit more on that. So my first question is, entrepreneurship, which seems to now be the buzzword for the millennials and Gen Z. What do you think that is something which is appropriately buzzing, or what are your thoughts on this, the word entrepreneurship overall?
Well, I can jump in there and start us off on that discussion because being not of one of those generations, maybe I'll bring a different perspective of a different generation. And I strongly believe that entrepreneurship has been around for a very long time. And even in ancient cultures, we see some entrepreneurial activity. So we do know it has been there for a long time. But what is very exciting to see is to see the amount of passion and energy which the current generations, the millennials and the Gen Zs, are putting into entrepreneurship. And I think that there's a lot about our context right now, which is really making it the perfect time to start thinking about entrepreneurship and thinking about how we might apply ourselves entrepreneurial. Because large organizations are looking to automation and they're looking at other ways of gaining efficiencies. And that means a reduction of potential job opportunities in those large organizations. And the fantastic knock-on effect of that is that we've seen this rising of entrepreneurial activity in our emerging talent who start thinking about how might I then apply myself to create my own opportunities. So I'm very excited to see the amount of energy that is around in the current generations.
Spot on. Lovely. Thank you so much for that. That's actually very true. Any of you want to pick that up after?
Yeah, I think Ankit wanted to go ahead. Ankit,
Oh, thank you so much, Ishan. So basically, like while growing up, I think the word entrepreneur wasn't so common, but you heard terms like businessman and industrialist and all these terms which were like more common back then. But what's happened with this whole entrepreneurship drive is that it's actually become much more common for people to get into this space, right? While growing up, you didn't really get access to this space. Right. But now with how easy it is to get information, how education is rounded up in a more global fashion, it's become easier to enter and build something yourself, right? So there were like
Right.
mom and pop shops or small businesses back then. Right now it's become all classified as startups, and with startups there's this whole ecosystem that's been built around, so you have access to other businesses, other people who can help you grow that business in a much better fashion, as well as it gives you that ease of entry. Earlier I think there was a lot of risk involved, a lot of, and even today there's a lot of risk involved in creating something and growing it, but it gives you an access, it gives you an access point, it gives you people to look up to, and kind of learn from them and make them like learn positive things and see how you could apply it to yourself, or anything small that you start up with. It could be even something small like a side project. So that's something that's great. Yeah, sorry, I'll throw it to you, Ishan.
Thank you, Ankit. This is more convenient for me because I'm sort of building up on what Heather and Ankit already spoke of. But this is actually a PhD thesis waiting to happen. I already shared this with Jigyasa in one of our conversations, how I find it fascinating. And I'm going to talk about it from my perspective, from an Indian perspective, growing up. I know that earlier till about the 1970s, 80s, in India, the thing to do was to get a government job. The idea behind it was, it's stable income, you're set for life, you do not have to, worry about any risk, so on and so forth. Then I think from the 80s or maybe early 90s, when India sort of opened up, you had risk neutrality. So people were, exactly to Ankit's point, then going into businesses, becoming businessmen. And again, I want to make sure that we notice what Heather said at the beginning. It has always been there,
Right.
but the opportunity, and that is my third point. But let me first complete the cycle that I was referring to. So we had risk aversion, as an economist would say, and then you have risk neutrality for about a couple of decades, from the 1990s to say mid 2000s, and around then is when India almost became risk seeking, or at least the youth of India became risk seeking,
Yeah.
because we have gone through that cycle of stability, neutrality, and then bang for your buck is what everyone's after. But this is one part mentality, but the other part is, as Ankit said, and Heather is an expert in this, so I'll heed to her later on this, but there's globalization happening at the same time. So a young kid sitting in a corner of India is watching lectures on YouTube from Deakin and Harvard and all of these great colleges, and they are almost at par with all the basic ideas that they have. And globalization then factoring into education, because I
Right.
think education has sort of pushed, and it's in no way am I suggesting that it's a perfect system of our education anywhere in the world, and I've had some experience across continents, but I do think that we have started appreciating. I'm also a professor. I should mention I'm also an assistant dean, and I know that I've seen this myself, how we now appreciate answers that are not within the sectional headlines of a lecture. So I would appreciate it more if a student of mine gives me an answer that wasn't in the books or that wasn't discussed in the lecture. And I think that is a very good way of judging how our education is also sort of opening up to new ideas and forming the bedrock. But I know it's a short discussion, Gyasa, and we have a lot of questions to bring in. So maybe we could continue
No,
with the
this is
discussion.
very, very interesting that I feel like the perspective that we're getting from Heather and you, obviously apart from just the entrepreneurial side of it, the fact that education is changing, and that really means that it's filtering down somewhere. That means that impact that we've had in the industry is actually getting to some place. I mean, I remember having this startup discussion with someone, and I was saying that I started it when I was like 18 or 19 years old. And at that point of time, even although we technically had Facebook and all of that stuff, e-commerce was still not that developed, and I literally had to go to the post office and get those tracking papers and stuff like that. Whereas now, things are much simpler. Like Ankit mentioned, like the entry is much simpler. The risk aversion is there, but it's just so beautiful. I would love to build on this. But my next question is that how do you think that the work culture has actually changed in the startup, especially post-COVID, or rather whatever the new normal is? Ankit, do you want to take that up first?
Yeah,
sorry, go
ahead.
for it, Sam.
So I'll keep it short this time. I promise. I think for those of us who are, I think two things have happened because of COVID. Networking has become a lot easier.
Yes.
I know that if this thing was happening, to get all of us under the same roof would have been very difficult. So networking has become easier, which is, and for those of the young attendees in the audience, guys, networking is an asset that will serve you for the rest of your life. Please do not think that this is not the right age, or I have time, or I'm an introvert and I shouldn't have to do this and I have enough skills. Networking is very important, and COVID has helped with that. I also think, again, I don't know why I'm gravitating towards education systems again and again. That is certainly not in my...
It is PC Global at the end of the day, so go for it.
That's true. But I think the way global education has been formulated is that you have obstacle courses that you have to pass with every new standard that you want for yourself. So you do a basic degree, and then you do an MBA, and then you can go for a super specialization, or you go directly into the job market, and then you want to become the AVP and the VP and the president, and then you probably want to retire. That's a constant struggle from a very young age till you are at the retirement age.
Mm-hmm.
I think COVID gave us way too much time to reflect upon what we're doing. And if there are other opportunities, or if this is something that you'd be willing to do when you're 60, when you have arthritis and you don't want to get up from your bed, is this something that will drive you enough to get up and do your regular day's work? So I think COVID has helped us in reflection, and it has also made the world virtual. And I'm certainly not advocating for a virtual world, because I know that one Zoom call between two people is 130 grams of carbon footprint equivalent. But
wow, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, but over to you, Heather and Ankit, please.
Sure. I just want to elaborate a little more on Ishan's point that, one major change that we've seen during COVID is the adoption of technology and how to make this world more virtual, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone before COVID, I'm sure, must have been on one video conferencing app in their lives. But like post-COVID, now we've had an array of Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, now on Hopin. So there's just quite a few lists of things. So it's made it easier to attend to people, made it easier to meet people across the globe, made the globe a smaller place, pretty much, right? But the point I want to get to little more towards your question, right, is that how has it changed the work culture, or how has it changed? So again, we've seen that the adoption of technology, not just virtual meetings or conferencing or communication, has become so much easier. I just want to give an example. Like pre-COVID, I would see like in my building, there would be probably like 5 or 6 Amazon packets, right? Like, and now you go down and there is like probably 200. So we've seen that we've really adopted technology, quicker methods of getting stuff, more efficient methods, and it's given us that huge leap into efficiency with adopting technology. So the same that I can say about my work culture or even my clients, because a lot of stuff that we need to do is communicating with clients. They've been ready to adopt technology better, and because we create technology, we've seen like a big that initial inertia that was there when pre-COVID of should I change my systems, should I take this technology, is it gonna like be too much effort, it's a risk, that has kind of reduced tremendously. So this is not just for my clients, not just for me, it's for everyone in my company, everyone that I see in my daily life, social circles. They've been able to take technology and adopt it in different factors. And there is a lot of businesses also that have sprung up, a lot of softwares, applications that have sprung up, that have reduced this gap. And that's what I've seen the biggest change too, right? Like now a lot more things are virtual, just like Ishan said. Networking has become so much easier virtually, even though like same way I advocate that in-person meeting is required to some degree, right? But it's also become easier to convey points, to be able to get learning and education. Biggest place where I've seen that technology has played a part is a lot of things have become online, which I think the post-COVID has helped it to actually accelerate it quite a bit, right?
Absolutely,
So that's the changes I've seen. Yeah.
So I love that Ishan and Ankit have both described some of the changes that have happened. And I suppose I'll flip that and talk about what is still consistent, regardless of whether there's COVID or not. What is consistent is still required the hard work. So we can't get around that. We still need to work hard to make a success, whether there's COVID or not. But I do like that COVID has created all these opportunities, which Ishan and Ankit have described really beautifully in terms of how this market's opening up and how these opportunities are opening up, and how much more, based on our virtual connections, how much more global we've become in our thinking and our reach. And our networking is not constrained anymore to who we can see in person, but it's this idea that we can connect with a large part of the world. So I really love that at the moment there's things that have stayed the same that we still have to do, and then there's other things that have just opened up in this COVID world. So it's a bit of both.
Amazing. Awesome. I'm just loving all the answers, but we're going to have to speed it up a little bit so that we get to actually cover a lot of the points. So my third question is actually, so what would it take to launch and to sustain a successful startup, especially, again, we're going to focus on the post-COVID world, and obviously, yes, take up whatever we could, stay consistent as well. So any of you want to pick that up first?
Sure, I can go.
Yeah.
There are a couple of things for a successful startup. First of all, again, and this is for especially for folks who are younger, who want to have a startup and want to get into this entrepreneurial business. Most of the entrepreneurs who you see who are very successful these days, and for those of us who've had a little success in this industry, it has never been about starting with the idea that I need to have a startup. On the contrary, it's been about starting with an idea. So make sure that your idea is innovative, it's distinctive. Now, there's another pointer here that's more of a rider, and I want to specify this. One of the advantages of having had different stages of development in countries, globally, you can also replicate ideas from elsewhere. That is happening a lot in India and some other developing nations. That's absolutely fine. But still, there has to be an idea that is strong enough to be able to disrupt something. Now, it could be disrupting the education system, disrupting the markets, disrupting the tech space, disrupting something as simple as, having a bunch of cab drivers, connecting all of them and making sure that everyone hails a cab through your app. And it's just an idea, and all the components of that idea were already there. There were cabs in existence, there were cab drivers in existence. It's just that you were sort of putting everyone under one roof in that app, and that then becomes an Uber or an Ola or a Lyft, and it's an idea. So have faith in your idea. And so idea is a prerequisite. The second thing I think is a prerequisite is failures, and the ability to be shot down and take it on your chin and take the most positive of all the criticism that you get, because unless that's I want to put this in an organic manner. You do learn to walk by falling, and I know it's a cliche, but sometimes it also prepares you in terms of your idea and execution and supply chains and consumption, but it also prepares you to take no as an answer, because sometimes when we're very headstrong with an idea and we have a lot of belief, we do not wish to take no as an answer. But sometimes the no actually means, well, it means that you need to tinker your idea further, or you need to have different strategies that you should explore. And I always, whenever I talk about this in my lectures or sessions, I talk about, I draw an analogy with the environment impact assessment, the thing that is done before any new industry or factory or anything comes up. You have to do a test of what is the best option. Sometimes when we have our ideas, we're so excited about those that we just don't see if there are any alternatives that are available that might compete with our idea, or there might be better routes available to approach that idea. So I think ideas and failures, I know they seem very ironical, but those are two things that you should be absolutely open to when you're and there are so many things. I'll cede the floor to Heather, and she could add to.
Eshan, I'll jump in there because I violently agree with you in terms of we often are taught to try and avoid failure, but what we actually are advocating for is that you have to embrace that opportunity to fail and rather do it early in the process. So I love the idea. You really need to take your ideas and get as much critical feedback on those ideas as you can, because you don't want to be standing in front of funders and then they ask the question which you could have been asked a number of months ago and gone, oh, actually, I haven't thought that through yet. You want to really debate and really look at your ideas in a lot of detail up front. So, yeah, we really want to be critical about those. But I also love, and I want to really underline the point you raised about that we don't necessarily have to come up with something new. What we're finding is a problem in a particular context, and we might be using solutions from all over the world that have been used in a completely different contexts and saying this is the perfect solution to solve this problem. Our problem will be unique, but our solution could be from anywhere in the world, from any sphere, from any sector. That's the exciting thing, is that we can pull these ideas from all over and integrate them into solutions. So we think about our solution as being unique, but our problem being unique, but our solution could be from all over. So I really loved what you're saying there. It really resonated with me, Eshan. What about you, Ankit? What do you think?
Definitely. I just want to start off by saying I'm very honored to have as my co-panelists two people who are very much into the education space, because I think that's where a lot of learnings come into play when someone is going and trying to start up something new. However small it must be, right? I think education plays a long part in your work ethics, your way of thinking, your way of analyzing and solving problems, just like how Heather said, right? I think that preludes to when you have your idea and how you go about actually putting in the work to create something out of nothing, right? I also want to say that, like, one thing that I have learned is over time is to not be shy and not be against taking help from anywhere and everywhere, right? Your education, from what we know it, is what the formal education is, whether it's school, college, but education is happening every day in our lives. Every day we are learning something new, whether it might be from the internet, whether it may be from your peers, whether it may be from the media, right? So I think just looking around you, asking people for help, and people aren't averse in helping, right? Like if someone comes to you with some kind of advice or that they are seeking out, everyone is going to help. So I don't think you can get bad answers or harmful answers from anyone. You have to obviously segregate the data, see what works for you the best, and kind of like put that into fruition. So I feel that actually just keeping your eyes open, trying to find out as much information you can from any source you can is the best way to sustain your business, and to also be agile, right? Like, it's to get that small idea that might make that little bit difference, and you kind of grow that into a much bigger solution, a much bigger platform, a much bigger value proposition for anyone. And that's where I think you'll be able to kind of succeed, sustain, or even like grow even the smallest of ideas that are there, right? Yeah.
I love that. I'm actually just going to add on to the points that everybody just said. So now with the Gen Z, we've seen that there's this whole, especially with social media coming in and stuff like that. This is actually my favorite question to ask everyone, which is, there's this culture of this hustle culture that has been created, and suddenly, like Ishan mentioned before, that it used to be a thing to get government jobs. Now it's like a thing that you need to have a startup, and it's just like the new cool quotient almost that has started existing. So, the fact that because a lot of entrepreneurs have been regarded with, let's say, like people dropped out of college, and then education. So I'm just adding on to what Ankit, you already touched on. But what do you think the long-term impact of that actually is? Because these kids, they might be, going somewhere with this idea of becoming cool and being, whatever, and actually doing something of it, which is great, which we didn't see 16-year-olds doing before. But also at the same time, they're also maybe surpassing a lot of that educational and that learning stage to become millionaires quickly, and that hustle culture. So just your thoughts around that. Anyone who wants to?
I have very strong views about this, Jigyasa. I've thought about this enough. I think instead of shooting these folks down who have the courage to take that leap, which honestly we didn't, at least I didn't at that age, I think education will have to adapt.
Right.
Education will move from long-term 5-year, 3-year, 4-year courses to what is now called a minor credential course. So if I am an entrepreneur and I might not have formal education in the form of an MBA or an LLM in my case, in that case, I should, and I want to work in, say, environmental policy, I should be able to do a 3-month course or a 6-month course or a 1-month course just to know exactly what I wish to do. For that, I should not have to, put in 5 years of my life just to learn that one thing, because it's a component of a larger degree. So I think education will evolve. Again, I speak from my experience. GPOTS Fellowship, before it became what it is today, I was seriously in doubts, because when I had conducted, and probably in hindsight, it wasn't the best place to conduct a group study. But we were at the World Economic Forum, where we conducted the group study to launch the GPOTS Fellowship. And folks told us that, these are the things that you require. And I think I mentioned this earlier as well yesterday, that you require policy writing because you need good communicators, and you require solution-based thinking and systems thinking, and so on and so forth. So when I was told these things, and I knew that this is the need of the hour and this is what the employers are looking for, but why would anyone take up a fellowship on sustainability that's talking about systems thinking? And I'm glad that I listened to those folks, and the result is before us today. People want to learn about that particular thing that will be useful for them. So I think education will evolve to the changing needs as well.
Lovely. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Anybody else wants to add on to that?
Sure. Oh, sorry, Heather, please go ahead. Okay, thank you. Just want to continue on what Ishan was saying, that education has changed quite a bit over the years, especially from when I was in school. Now I'm seeing either my younger cousins, nieces, nephews going to school, and having a whole different method of education now. It's become, I would say, a lot more fun than what we had back in our days. Apart from it being a lot of it being online now in the last couple of years, but I feel like there's a lot more effort being put into kind of grooming in terms of practicality. real world examples being put in. This is higher up studies, but a lot more effort, a lot more learnings are being put in into actually how to apply what you're being taught. I think that's one of the biggest things. And the second thing is again, I'm going to touch upon a topic that I'm very biased on, is technology. So technology coming into the education sphere, whether it's ways of education or whether it's even part of the curriculum. So I do feel, because technology has become so part of our lives, that it is pretty needed for everyone to have some sort of understanding on how to use technology to make yourself, your business, your life more efficient. At the end of the day, I think that's what it's catered for, is to automate tasks that would probably take more time to do or take more effort to do, and so that you can divert your attention in creating something new to grow something or to solve other problems. So it's an enabler, more like that. So my thing with education is that I would suggest everyone to be able to harness what you learn in terms of education and be able to actually apply it to your lives, not just maybe your professional lives, but it could be any aspect of your life, to be able to grow it, to be able to make it better. And this will also reduce the amount of trial and error that you need to be doing. And that's what we're doing as human beings on a daily basis, doing trial and error and learning more and more and more going on. But the more you try and apply what you kind of learn, you kind of because you're shown the path and you are kind of using that to the best ability that you can. So that's what I feel about how education could help in your lives and even towards your work or professional life or creating something new. Sorry, Heather, to you.
No, totally agree with what you said, Ankit. I think you and Eshan have really summarized that area beautifully, so I won't add any more.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to jump on to the next question quickly because we only have 10 minutes left. But so why we've already discussed that obviously startups are getting really popular. So when you actually have that idea that we talked about, how and when do you actually act on those ideas? And at what stage in your journey do you start raising funds and doing all of that kind of stuff? And what are your views on it?
I could jump in there first in terms of that one. So I do a lot of mentoring of startups and a lot of mentoring of scale-ups. And to me, what's really important is to have a really robust idea. So I think that before you even start talking funding, you really need to go back to some of those fundamentals. And I know Eshan and Ankit have spoken about really thinking about your idea and getting feedback and getting other people's perspective. So more than just testing the technology, you need to test the idea first. And I think you need to then progress to a point where your idea is robust enough that you can start talking to individuals who might be funders. So I would be quite cautious about including funding too early in the process, because I think you can do some potential work in that area before you go to funders to make sure that you have something that's really exciting, interesting, really solves a problem, and that you've thought through and that you've got feedback from. And I'll echo what my co-panelists have said about asking others for ideas. We are in an amazing community, and we are part of an ecosystem. And the fantastic thing is to see the power of the ecosystem and to go out to the ecosystem and talk to friends, family, other founders, other people who are busy in the startup world, and talk to everybody about your idea in those early stages. Actually, really, you need to bore everybody to absolutely tears about your idea, because that's what you need to be doing is talking about the idea at length so that people can give you feedback. So that's really what I'm really advocating, is you do a lot of thinking in the early stages. But over to my panelists in terms of their ideas, I'm fascinated to hear.
Thank you, lovely.
Yeah. So Heather, I think that really hit the nail on the head. That these ideas, it's tough to kind of put into fruition these ideas, But I want to say is one thing that I feel that is a wrong mindset that people try and enter or to create something. They feel like funding is the end goal, right? They feel that, oh, I'm starting something and my end goal is I need to get funded or I need to get acquired or I need to be able to sell out. And that's my end goal. For me, it seems like if you build something, funding becomes an enabler to growth. It should be thought of as a stepping stone rather than your end goal, right? It's not just about valuations. It's about how do you get your idea, how do you help people the most and give the biggest value proposition to people. So funding should come at a stage when you need it, when you need to be able to grow at a faster pace than you already are, to be able to spread your idea, your solution to more parts of the world or to more people in the world. So again, I feel like fundraising is an enabler. It's not the end goal. And that's where I feel people kind of differ and they have their aspirations set that way to actually enter the space because they hear that this company has got funded so much or this company has been bought out for so much. That is all part of the journey, right? It's not the end goal that's coming up. So yeah, that's my views on funding.
Brilliant.
Yes,
I love
Ishan,
that.
to you. Yeah.
No, I don't think I have anything to add. I think Heather and Ankit, both of them have touched upon exactly what that's like the funding 101 of the mentality that people have.
I wish I had you guys when I was doing all of this. Honestly, it would have been really helpful. But I love all of your pointers about everything, honestly. But I'm gonna have each one of you just give in your closing thoughts because we only have another 2 or 3 minutes left. So I'll hand it over to you guys. Any closing thoughts about startups in general, not just about becoming a unicorn, but it becoming as also part of your life? I think it really changes you as a person. I mean, I don't know what I would have been if I didn't go through an entrepreneurial journey in my life, and it would have been quite boring actually. So I'm going to leave it to you guys and let me know what you think. Heather.
Absolutely. So lovely opportunity to share some of the insights and I know our timing is short. So I'll just talk about in the journeys that I've been part of in terms of the mentorship that I've provided to startups and scale-ups. I think for me, what's really important is making sure that you've got support in place. So making sure that you've got something, people that you can rely on, people that you can talk to, that you can debrief with, because startup is really intense and a really hard work. So I think that it's important to develop your network, to develop your ecosystem, have people you can reach out to who will be more than willing to step in and give you a hand, give you an idea, give you support. And I think that to me is the most important thing. So I'd really advocate that everybody who's in this space thinks about who am I connected with, who's my network, who can I rely on. I think that's really important. And as a final statement, just to say it's really fun in the startup space. There's so much energy, there's so much excitement, there's so much to be done in that space. And yes, so I'm excited about anybody who's thinking about entrepreneurship and thinking about that as an alternative.
So cool. Amazing. Thank you. Ishan or Ankit?
All right, I'll go first. One thing that I got, a piece of advice I got very early in my life, which has stuck by me, which has really helped me throughout. In fact, that's half the reason why I'm still an academic or I still teach on the side, is because there's absolutely no substitute for domain knowledge. You might have a startup, you might do very well and you might become a unicorn, but never lose sight of what your expertise is. For example, in edtech space, you want to concentrate on education or tech. Who are you an expert in? That's a call that you have to make. So there's absolutely never, ever a substitute for domain knowledge. Neither the funding that you've got, nor the legitimacy of how quickly or how gradually you've become what you have become. And the second thing which folks should be mindful of, and this is not to discourage them, but to prepare them when they enter the space, is that the KRA of the key responsibility areas of a founder. Well, I don't speak for everyone, but if you come to my office, I'll be designing mental models with you for my startup, and I'll also be making you tea. So you should be prepared to do everything from top to bottom. And it's tough work because you are invested fully. You have to have, I think, as Heather was saying, you have to have a very good support system who understands that this is where you are required. And sometimes you're unfair to a lot of folks in your social circle, a lot of parties that you'll miss. So you should know that there's a work ethic element that comes with starting your own business. And again, always be mindful that when you're becoming a co-founder, either you should have a fridge full of beers, or at least you should know how to make good tea. Otherwise, don't think that you'll be served all of these things, because for the first few years, you'll be addressing all of these issues.
You'll be everything. Yeah. Love that. Okay. I mean, actually, I was brought up with this word core competency in my mind my entire life, and I was told that fine, you want to do whatever you want to do, okay, but if you don't have the core competency, that's how I went and did my master's. But yeah, Ankit, I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Yeah, awesome stuff, Heather and Ishan. I think I agree with everything what you guys have said. For me, I think entrepreneurship is kind of a synonym for adventure. It's basically it's thrilling. It's something new. It's something that you will learn tremendously in your life from. Whether it's, again, there's nothing like a failure, like a bad failure. But even if it's for a short stint, you're going to learn so much, because again, you are doing everything exactly how Ishan said. Like you're making the tea as well as coming for a meeting, right? So I feel like you have to put on loads of different hats. And that really teaches you different things in different aspects of, whether it's communication, whether it is to do with operations, or whether it's to do with, if you're running a website, e-commerce website, how do you get that up? How do you get that live? How to do marketing? All that kind of stuff is an adventure. I would again say I again found so many similarities between like a startup and planning a vacation, right? You plan before you put out anything, or before you actually fly out for your vacation. You're doing your bookings, you're doing you're sitting and planning where you're going to go in that particular place, where are you going to venture off to, what you're going to see, right? So this is all the planning that goes ahead before your vacation. Now you get your vacation, you kind of get there, and you have to change stuff around on the way, right? Like you miss a flight, or you basically kind of you overstay someplace. All that planning kind of needs to like move around. You need to be flexible. You need to, and at the end of the whole vacation, what are you doing? You're learning about a new place, a new culture, seeing something new that exists in the world, right? So same way with entrepreneurship or starting up something new, it's this entire adventure that you'll be going on, whether it's for a short period of time, whether you do it and you don't get to the end goal that you're reaching, but on the way you're going to learn a lot while doing so. And I think that's the positives to take out.
I love that take on it. Yeah, it's definitely a roller coaster ride for you all. But thank you so much for your time, all three of you. I'm super privileged, and I'm sure CC Global is as well, that we have such great panelists coming on here and speaking to us. The recording obviously will be available for everybody to watch later. So we'll send you links to that when it is. Thank you so much for your time once again. Speak to you soon.
Thank you, Jigyasa.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Jigyasa.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.